Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And for some reason to me, it's like I feel like saying, oh man, welcome back after that break. It's been a while, but it hasn't. We did a show last week.
It's been a lifetime. I do feel like I've lived a full life since the last time we did this show. And it's just been like the last 2 days of just constant deals. Like, speaking of constant deals, we got this fucking cat just meowing at me constantly, and it's been 2 days of that, 2 days of dogs, and I'm just like, you know what? I think Ben Matlock had a good run. It's time for a new identity in a new town. But yeah, we're here today with more shit, more fun shit.
I've got something a little different today. It's not like our normal like murdery, suicide, sex criminal, serial killer stuff. Although there is a little bit of murder in there, so don't worry if you do like that stuff. There's a little. I require it. Hey, if you look at the fine print when we started this show, we can't have feel-good stories, all right? This is... Well, I'll just have to start like adding fake murder to feel-good stories. Be like, oh, this person cured cancer, and then they murdered their neighbors with cancer.
It's the Non-Essential Podcast for fucking bringing you down.
This week I had a topic, and it's funny because it came to mind. It was one of those things we've talked about before. Sometimes you just get an idea of what kind of story you want, and then you look for like an interesting story in that, like ghost stories. Sometimes you're like, hey, I want to tell a ghost story. Let's look for a cool ghost story or whatever.
And usually you can't find what you're looking for, but you'll find something along the way.
Right. This topic is one that I actually really enjoy. When I dawned on me that I could do it as a show topic, and I'll probably use it, as more fodder down the road. But it kind of blows my mind that I never thought to kind of explore this route with show topics. But I've got this real guilty pleasure. I've talked a little bit about it on the show for treasure hunting, like treasure hunting shows. Curse of Oak Island. A lot of people know what that is, even if you don't watch it. But if you don't, it's the legend of his treasure that's supposedly hidden on Oak Island up in Canada, and these two brothers have spent more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime just digging random fucking holes all over the island looking for this treasure that, in my opinion, is not there. But then there's other shows, where
they said the same thing to Nathan Drake in the Uncharted games, and he found shit every time. So.
Every time, yes. And then there's a lot of other shows. There's like Treasure Hunters, I think it's just called, and they've gone around and whatever, and shows about like shipwreck diving where they find treasure, and some they find treasure, some they're chasing these like legends, and that's what came to mind. There's a lot of legendary treasures out there that may or may not be real, but people have been looking for them for, in a lot of cases, hundreds of years. So that's what I got this week. It's a story about a legendary treasure.
So I think I had that interest in like treasure hunting, and then when I realized like none of it's actually cursed, then it's like, oh, well, that's not.
You weren't in it for the money. You wanted the curse, like the Indiana Jones style.
Yeah, I wanted I wanted greed to lead to my downfall. I genuinely wanted that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, if you could pick what your last words are going to be, and they have to be like, well, I guess I was going to say they have to be in a content so it makes sense, but it's almost better if it doesn't. But like, if my last words are "this belongs in a museum," I'm cool with that. Like,
those wouldn't be my last words. I would just be like the fucking bad guy in Last Crusade, just like, what's happening, and then I'll turn into a skeleton.
But so that's what I got this week, a treasure story. So in 1811, that marked the start of the Peruvian War of Independence. Of course, we're all familiar with that.
Yeah, here in America, we give a lot of shit about wars that aren't about us. So I think we're all well-versed in the Peruvian Revolution.
It was a 15-year conflict in which the locals and local colonies rose up against the Spanish, who had ruled since the wonderful conquests of the 16th century, back the conquistadors. And it wasn't just the Spanish, it was that we've kind of talked about colonialization before.
And how rad it is. How it made everything so cool.
I know there was also all this great stuff that the white man didn't have, but they deserved because they were obviously were better.
What if everything glorious over here got whiter? And just then the ship sailed in.
So by 1820, the Spanish rulers in the city of Lima could see that things were probably not going to go their way. So they rounded up the 300 years worth of treasure that they'd stolen and amassed and decided to get it out of there. And according to one account, their plan was to sail it around for a while to keep it out of reach. So yeah, not like take it somewhere else, but just like, hey, let's put this on a boat and sail around. That way when they sack the city, it won't be here.
I like it. Great plan.
Yeah. Most accounts actually say it was bound for Mexico, which makes way the hell more sense because
I don't know. I kind of like just like take it out to water, serpentine for like months.
Yeah, it's not really the safest plan given how many ships sink even today, but especially back then. But I like that. It's like where should I go with this, master? And I'm like, just circles. And you're like, what? You're like, yes, circles. I like your serpentine one even better.
Just a squiggly from one coast to another.
To the other. Yeah. From time to time, cruise by close enough to see whether we have actually won the war or not.
Pretend to speak another language so people think you're just a random trade ship.
This treasure was estimated to have a value of over $200 million in today's dollars. I think they said it was like 12 or 16 million back then, but who cares? It was a big treasure. Of course, once they loaded this treasure on a ship, it would never be seen again. The legendary hull is now known as the Treasure of Lima, or sometimes it's referred to as the Loot of Lima, which I like better.
So, like, let's just be clear here. You sent out all this money on a boat, and it disappeared, and you're like, it's legendary, it's vanished.
Oh, you'll like it even better here in a second, I think. But before I continue, I did want to add a disclaimer in here that most of these treasure stories tend to be a mix of a little bit of history and a lot of like tall tales and local legends, that kind of stuff. I've included the parts of the legend that I thought were like most interesting, but I had no way like had vetted these historically to try to separate fact from fiction. These stories honestly tend to be way more fun that way. If you try to be like realistic about it and what you can prove, it's like, oh, there was money and it's gone.
Well, how about this? For those folks at home who want a solid answer, at the end of the show, I'll give it to you and I'll decide if it's fact or fiction. I always wanted to do that since like Beyond Belief with Jonathan Frakes.
So anyway, the treasure consisted of gold, silver, gems, and it was rumored to include 2 life-sized gold sculptures of the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus, completely like decked out in gems. Which that part I kind of believe because what's more like churchy at the time than be like, oh, we're the church, we're very Christian, we believe in Christ. Let's steal your gold and make Virgin Mary statues.
I mean, some churches today still like, how they managed to fucking merge like the most humble of belief systems, what should be the most humble of belief systems, into like, but we got to have our fucking bling, So,
I just saw a headline like yesterday about this church that's kind of under fire because they've bought their pastor like, I can't remember if it was 2 million or 20 million, but just in like gold like jewelry and rings and stuff, and saying as like gifts from the congregation. It's like, yeah, I think you need to reread some of those Bible verses.
Jesus would be all about that.
Yeah, right.
If he knew what you could do with gold to make that shit flash, he never would have been a carpenter. And that's in the text.
So yeah, I just love this mental image of this like completely like bedazzled Virgin Mary statues that are life-size. Like I said, that part just kind of falls under realm in my books as likely to have happened. So that's what the treasure consisted of. The Viceroy of Lima had, because of course the treasure was under church control. Church and government at the time were basically the same thing because they had all the money that they had stolen from the locals. But anyway, the Viceroy had chosen Captain William
Thompson. You say
Thompson.
stolen, I say colonized.
Don't it? Yeah.
We had a mandate.
Look, they didn't know what they had. They didn't even realize it was valuable, so it's our godly right to come in there and say, hey, this is ours now. By the way, you're going to die of smallpox. Have fun with that. And I think that's the biggest kicker there is how much of them got wiped out by our diseases that we brought over, and our people didn't get nearly the same reciprocation back. You'd think that you would equally catch there, and I know that happened, but it didn't wipe out the Spaniards. So,
well, it says something about just how fucking amazingly unhealthy white culture has been historically. Because of course we brought over fucking death diseases to these people who, they had their own shit, but nowhere near to something that could just fucking off their entire population.
Yeah, and
and we're and for us we're just oh, you got smallpox again? Put some ham on it and you'll be good.
I had that last week. You'll get used to it.
Yeah.
The treasure was given to Captain William Thompson. And like I said, he was ordered to sail the treasure somewhere on his ship, the Mary Dear. William Thompson was an upstanding man until he had $200 million worth of loot loaded onto his ship.
Yeah.
So as soon as they left Port, Thompson and his men murdered the clergy and the military guards and threw their bodies overboard.
Fucking, yeah. Yeah, of course.
I know. And they're oh, he became the most hated pirate of this family. He's kind of a hero in my books at this point.
I'm not condoning it, but it's absolutely. I don't care how honorable or how good of a rep or how many fucking old women a dude's helped cross the road. You don't give them that kind of fucking money.
And then send them out to sea where there's well, now we can't possibly watch you with this, but we're trusting you.
There's armored money trucks that don't give their drivers that kind of go ahead,
Right. So yeah, he murdered anybody connected the escort to the treasure, and then I presume they danced a jig and sang shanties because they all just made a whole bunch of fucking money.
Yeah.
Some people might call it the perfect crime, but they would be wrong because Thompson's ship was pretty quickly captured and the entire crew was executed via hanging. Except for Thompson and his first mate, James Alexander Forbes.
So bad serpentine technique.
Yeah.
They got so caught up in the money, they lost sight of what really mattered then.
But
technique.
That really points out how absurd the idea of let's just sail around with this treasure for a while so it doesn't get taken, because they found him pretty easily. You would imagine the English could have found him pretty easily too. And I would think that the rumors of this treasure would get out there pretty quickly when you load that much crap onto a boat and just send it out to sea.
Here's what a fucked up, deplorable piece of shit I am, is I'm imagining and I'm putting together a plan to pull off this heist. As you're telling me the story of a heist, that something happened, fucking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And I'm just you know what? Here's what you do. You fake a shipwreck, all right? You leave all the money in a cave somewhere. You wreck your ship. You get away on small boats. And then you leave the money there for a few years until they can't find you. I'm putting together this whole plot in my head.
Well, they didn't apparently plan it that well because they got caught. Thompson and his first mate, Forbes, were spared, obviously because they said that they would lead their captors to where they had hidden the treasure. Their destination was an island called Cocos Island off the coast of Costa Rica. Upon arriving at said island, Thompson and Forbes made their escape into the jungle. Got away scot-free.
Awesome. I hope they just left them on a random fucking island. Just to be yeah, the treasure's not there. But we spent it, is the thing.
The legend says that Thompson eventually made his way back to Newfoundland via passage on a whaling ship, and that Forbes ended up actually in California, where he became a successful businessman. So, good for him, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds right. Yeah. That was a savvy business opportunity, and he jumped on it. And
I like to think he's the same Forbes that you hear about today. Like that's how the Forbes thing started. Was this pirate guy?
That's how the horrible website got started, with their fucking horrible goddamn turn off your ad blocker shit. Like,
it is a little curious that the Forbes logo is a gilded Virgin Mary covered in jewels.
With glasses that say deal with it.
So legend says that that's where they ended up, but regardless, neither of them were ever seen trying to pawn a life-size Golden Mary statue. So it's presumed that the treasure is still out there somewhere.
I just like the idea that they're like busting off different body parts of this thing just to pay for like regular shit. It's just like,
how much is a golden breast worth? Well, that's worth way more than the golden toe that you turned in last week.
Yeah, so if I give you the golden breast, that should count for the payment and the tip, right? You know.
So it's presumed that the treasure's still out there, and it's presumed that the treasure was on Cocos Island, because that's where the men had said that they had definitely put it, and they weren't just saying that so that they could escape, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, my thoughts are, if they take you there and they escape, the treasure's probably anywhere except Cocos Island. But apparently the common thinking is that it's definitely
right, because if you accidentally find the treasure before they can get away, they're fucked. Like, I mean, they're not gonna. Maybe they would like give them some leniency, but like, you're still screwed.
They're pirates. And they murdered people. They were going to kill them as soon as they found the treasure. I guarantee it.
Yeah, or
at least jail them for the rest of their. It wasn't like, well, yeah, you did this horrible deed, but then you told us where it was, so that cancels out. You're good to go.
Yeah.
Maritime law even now, but especially back then, tended to be, it's like, oh, you talked back to your captain, beheading.
Yeah.
Like, it was very strict. Treasure hunters would focus their efforts on the island for the next century and a half. A German explorer by the name August Gissler would move to the island in 1889, so 69 years after the treasure's disappearance. Gissler's search was based around two separate maps that he had come across. I didn't find anywhere that said like how he had come across these, but apparently these maps he had got from two separate sources, and they both seemed to indicate the same part of the island where the treasure would be buried. His search resulted in the construction of a complex tunnel-like systems throughout the whole island. It very much reminded me of Oak Island, like, as I was reading this. In fact, the Costa Rican government was so like impressed by like the professionalism and his like the steps he was going through to find this treasure.
So basically, turn this fucking island into like those. Have you seen like those images of like what an ant colony looks like underneath like the surface? Yeah. So like that's what I imagine he's doing with this island.
Pretty much, yes. But the government decided that like he was so into it that they were gonna actually name him governor of the island. It was an uninhabited island, so it wasn't like he was just like, whatever.
Fuck it, you can have it, I guess, if it means that much to you.
They named him governor and let him found a colony there. There was soon a small farming community based, on the island, but the settlement and the treasure hunt wouldn't last that long. Well, I guess it lasted about 19 years, but the conditions on the island... No, that's amateur.
I've been looking for gold in my backyard for 52 years now.
Dagnabbit.
And I will find it when
just a quitter.
Those squirrels are trying to throw me off, but I know it's there.
Apparently, like, the conditions on this island are so bad and it's so remote that the families that had moved there to kind of... the way that I read it, they didn't move there, like, as a treasure hunting community, but it's like... If you're going to have a sustained treasure hunt, you kind of need, like a town. Because you need some kind of economy and food source and this and that. But all the families that moved there were like, yeah, fuck this, and they moved away. August and his wife were the last to move. They abandoned the island in 1908. So like I said, about 19 years after they started their hunt there. Over the 19 years, Gissler's search... recovered a total of 6 gold coins, but 0 bejeweled Virgin Marys. And the problem with coins is, and then they run into this on the Oak Island show that like I said, that's a guilty pleasure. I love it it's such a absurdist thing. And they find coins, and they found coins that are like 300 years old, and to them, that's proof that there's treasure here. It's proof that somebody was there, but coins get dropped all the time. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. It does confirm people have been there. But
grab a fucking John Wick coin and then talk to me. And then we'll know there's a history there.
Right. So, yeah, 6 coins, but nothing much else. It should be noted, too, though, that Gisler was also searching for the treasure of Benito Bonito. And I need to look that up. I didn't have time, but anybody whose name is it's Benito Bonito. So his parents were the least fucking creative. It's like they had a son. He was probably like their 23rd kid or something, and they're like, fuck, I don't know what to call him. What if we just change a letter of our last name? Like...
Well, I mean, that's, it's better than I'll sometimes see like a documentary or a movie or something where it's like a character's like Rodriguez,
John
Johnson, Is it really worse than that? I don't think so. There's nothing worse than John Johnson. If your name's John Johnson and you're listening to this, I'm so fucking sorry for what they did to you.
Yeah, I am too.
There's just like one guy listening to this, just like
that's our one listener. Is John Johnson. Yeah,
I appreciate that. I guess.
So in the 1930s, the island was visited by probably one of the most unlikely treasure hunting crews to ever set sail, at least that I've ever heard of, led by the legendary gangster Bugsy Siegel.
Oh hell yeah! Now I'm all in.
I know this story. It's like we talked about. You look for a certain thing and you find something. You're like, this will be a good. And then the more you get into it, you're like, this is getting better by the second.
No, this is great because it's like going to show how fucking like boring mafia life actually is. That one of them has to be like, well, let's look for treasure. Yeah.
So apparently, when Bugsy had moved his crime racket out to L.A., he had the connections in the crime world, but he hadn't broken his way into the Hollywood scene, with the elites and socialites, celebrities. So he needed a way into that scene, and that's when he met a wealthy countess who was married to a much older man. And apparently her husband was kind of okay with her going out and having these flings because it was one of those marriages where it was like,
marriage
I just want to be
status,
married. Yeah, yeah. And he understood that it's like, well, she's always going to stray, but if I allow it, then our marriage stays together.
And I'm still the husband,
Right. And this wealthy countess, she had the connections to the Hollywood scene. However, she craved excitement and adventure, and of course, a lover who wasn't much, much older than her. So the two quickly became an item, and that's when Bugsy told her about a treasure map he'd come across that led to loot on a sandy island off of the coast of Costa Rica, which you can all guess what island that was. She was eager for the adventure, and he thought it would be easy money. So they assembled a crew along with a handful of other wealthy socialites. And that's what I mean. It was kind of like a Gilligan's Island of treasure hunting. And they sailed off to Cocos Island. However, as I mentioned earlier, Cocos Island was not some sandy tropical paradise. The crew, when they, faced with this rocky shore and this thick, uninhabited jungle vegetation, quickly abandoned their search. Sounds like they dug for about a day. It's one of those deals where they're all drunk and they're all rich assholes and they're like, yeah, adventure, treasure hunts. Oh, what do you mean the treasure's not just sitting here waiting for us when we get here?
Right.
So they very quickly grew tired of actually hard work that digging in a tropical island is. Yeah.
Knowing the personalities from all the documentaries I've watched about those types of people, just imagining the frustration of being Bugsy, you piece of shit. What did you get us into?
Well, I kind of imagine the opposite, where they're not mad at it because they were just treating it like a lark in the first place. They're just oh, ha ha ha, we're sailing around the world, and that's what happened. Bugsy was really into this. He got pissed because they were all just staying on the yacht, sitting under their parasols and drinking champagne. That's basically a direct quote from my source there. But yeah, they were just living it up on the boat, partying, treating it like this funny vacation.
That's the other way that it would go, is just they wouldn't take it seriously.
Right.
And one guy would be really grumpy about it.
And Bugsy was pissed, and he kept trying to find it, and when he couldn't, he decided to exchange a shovel for the explosives that he had smuggled aboard. It just started like blowing up chunks of the island.
I just love, like, he knows what like this hunt is in terms of scope, and he has no fucking like history of like tracking shit down, and he's just like, you know what? Here's something they never thought of. Give me the dynamite,
Right. And apparently, or at least as the legend goes, but again, I didn't go down to Cocos Island to check, but apparently you can still see like the chunk of the island that he blew up looking for the treasure. Shockingly, he never found it.
Oh, man.
In the 1970s, the island had become such a hotspot for treasure hunters that the Costa Rican government stepped in and made it illegal to treasure hunt in the area.
All right, that's bullshit. What are we just embracing fascism now?
I'm kind of split on that, because on the one hand, it's like, fuck it, let them look for the treasure if you say it's out there. On the other, I am kind of a conservationist, and I like my nature, and I do hate the idea of these people just like bulldozing an entire fucking island looking for a treasure that most definitely isn't there.
But so it could be there. And
I say you allow responsible treasure hunting. You allow it, but don't let them like burn the forest down.
Fucking explosives are responsible treasure hunting, all right? It would be irresponsible to leave that much money underground. You know? We have to be sure, destroy the ground.
So anyway, that was shut down in the 1970s, and I know just from my like personal interest in this treasure hunting stuff, although it's a passing, like a hobby interest. Obviously, I'm not a treasure hunter, but in recent years, a lot of governments have actually enacted these, and I think they're bullshit laws that change salvage rights on treasure. Basically, most countries now claim ownership of any treasure found that they can prove came from their country. For instance, that's why a lot of this, back in the 80s and 90s, shipwreck hunting was very big looking for treasure. Very few people actually made it big, but a few did. But now, if you find a Spanish galleon and it's got treasure, Spain gets to claim rights to that treasure because it's
bullshit.
a Spanish galleon. It is. That's complete fucking...
That's stealing
that pisses
from
me
thieves,
off because the whole thought behind maritime salvage laws are it's lost, it's expensive to get to, it's risky to get to. If you take those risks and costs and you find it, you've earned that, that's yours. Now, of course, too, I say I'm a conservationist, and we kind of joked about Indiana Jones earlier, but I guess the thoughts are, too, a lot of this stuff you find is national treasures, and it really does belong in museums. But I'm not convinced that's where the government's put this.
And I'm fine with all of that, provided you give me $200 million.
Right, that's what the deal should be. It's like, fine, it goes back to the country to be preserved and put on display, but I want compensation for it.
Otherwise, sorry, I guess this is my Spanish galleon now. Sorry.
Right. So I don't know what Costa Rica's treasure laws are. Although
stop looking for treasure. That's the only law they have.
I think it's interesting if both of these laws apply. Say they do have those rights to claim the treasure, but it was on a Spanish ship that was fleeing Costa Rica, and it wasn't all stuff that was stolen from Costa Rica, because what happened is, once Spain has a colony there, they kind of centralize all this wealth that they're stealing from everywhere in South America. But it's who would have I consider it a bullshit claim on it anyway, but who would have that claim? Because I could see Spain being hey, it was our Spanish ship that went down. And they'd be yeah, it was our treasure, assholes. And if I'm the guy that finds it, I'd be well, you two argue. I'm going to be over here,
waiting for one of you to pay me.
Typing up my eBay listing for a golden Virgin Mary. So that would be an interesting wrinkle. But I've kind of always like I said, I like these stories, but always wondered about the validity of buried treasure stories in general. I mean, it's definitely happened because there are there's treasure out there that people have found and been hey, look, we found this treasure.
The thing is, though, as soon as the first idea of buried treasure ever came across some fucking pirate's mind or something, there were like a million more ideas of like, well, let's do that as a red herring, you know,
Right.
and so it's like, and just adding time on top of it, it's like, it's even with all of our like navigational equipment and like the ability we have to like map things out more, it's, as time goes on, it gets even harder to find that shit.
Well, that's the thing, especially in environments like that down there where you have tsunamis and hurricanes and shit. 200 years. I mean, it's literally 200 years to the day that, well, not to the day. I don't know that, but 200 years to the year. It was 1820 when they tried to evacuate this treasure out of Lima, and then the guy, stole it and whatever. Over 200 years, you could be talking feet of new ground that's piled up on top of anything that was already buried below ground, and things shift. But the bigger thing in my mind is, especially in a story like this, where supposedly, the captain and his first mate escaped and lived, is that you'd think eventually one of the two or both would go fucking back and try to get that treasure.
Yeah, and assuming it was on Coco Island.
Well, I mean, wherever they actually buried it, you would assume that they would try to go back, because what's the point of being like, we stole all this money and then we got caught, but then we got away and then we're just going to leave it there. Like, I know where it's at, but
that would actually be probably my approach if I got caught. I'd be like, fuck it, let's just get out of here.
I'd want my money. You'd want to give it some time to like die down, but and then everybody argues, well, what happens if they just had no way to get back there because they were wanted men and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay. But then I'd probably, as I'm dying, tell my children where it's at. Like, you would think somewhere along the line.
So I'm going to tell my children there's buried treasure somewhere, and then just a note will be there that says, ha ha.
This is the only time you fuckers ever listened to me in your entire life.
Oh, now you care.
Deserve this.
Now you care that a dear old dad was dying. Well, fuck you.
So,
hope you enjoyed losing months of your life, assholes.
That's the part that always gets me about buried. Now, sunken ships are different because they sink and whatever. But it's like, how common really was it to bury treasure, and how common was it to never go back? In a lot of situations, there's a lot of people that would know where the location is, because this one, they give a little credibility to the legend by executing off the entire crew and leaving only 2 men. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these stories, it's like, oh, the whole crew buried the treasure and sailed off. And I get that, like, if you're just a regular sailor on the ship, you don't have the authority to get the gold. But as soon as my pirate captain gets hung, I'm like, well, he's out of the picture now. I'm going back and getting that fucking gold.
Even like the whole, 2 people can keep a secret if one is dead. It's like, it's not even like, you don't even have to wait for the captain to be dead for people to like turn on each other if they know where a fuck ton of money is. Right. So it's like, I don't think there was that many cases of actual like buried treasure, and
especially the larger the treasure gets, when they're like, there was a chest with some coins in it. Well, maybe, sure, because people did hide stuff.
Well, and I mean a lot of like classic pirate stories, and I have to imagine this mentality probably continued for a large part as long as like sailing was a thing. I think people would probably have this mentality now if it was more common, but like pirates would steal shit and then they would go immediately fucking spend it.
I was going to say, that's what people always say. Well, what happened to it? It's like they literally would drink it and whore it away. Like, that's why these pirate towns were full of prostitutes drinking and gambling. Because
like any pirate movie or anything, like that's not entirely fictionalized, of people just getting fucked up in a like constant party, and then they get like, they run out of money, have to get back on their ship and go steal shit. And in fact, that's actually one of the reasons why piracy, I would say, is allowed to go on. Obviously, they hunted pirates down and stuff, but a lot of times it wasn't like their biggest priority, because that money would get spent in these towns. They would go to the governors. The governors were usually tied back to the countries that the money was stolen from, and a lot of times it would be, hey, this pirate stole from Spain, and the money ended up back in England. England's pretty cool with that. That's the thing. Like, countries only cared about piracy once it started affecting their bottom line. So, like, the thing they didn't care was just the odd, like, small merchant ship getting picked off. It was like, once you started hitting their big company valuables, then they were like, okay, piracy's a scourge. Kind of how it is now, where it's like, that people don't give a fuck if you rob, a gas station. But as soon as you rob a bank, that's a headline.
A lot of times you get the same amount of money, but one is federal prison and one is whatever. But So yeah, I think a lot of these cases, these treasures don't exist. However, in 2016, the island of Cocos was hit by a rather bad storm. While surveying the damage, a pair of park rangers came across what turned out to be 5 wooden chests containing roughly $200 million worth of gold, silver, and precious gems. But because it was discovered on park property, the treasure is the property of the government and will eventually be put on display, although that's yet to happen. So yeah, take that.
Or the 2 park rangers ran off with it, and they swear they'll bring it back one day.
Or, to ruin my perfectly... I was like, that's a great twist ending, except there's literally zero corroborating evidence of any of that actually happening, so it turns out that that's probably still also just like part of the legend of the treasure, and nothing was ever actually found.
I thought you were going to ruin my fact or fiction closer here.
Yeah. So no, as best I could tell, and again, like I say, I'm not calling up Costa Rica trying to get quotes from the government on whether or not the treasure was found, but that last part would make for a great ending, except for everything looks like that's completely fabricated. You know, one of those like Facebook stories that goes around that has no basis in anything. So that's the end of my story. It's kind of short, but it's right up my, like, I love especially the like age of piracy, age of sail stuff.
Yeah. And
I love it even more when some TV channel decides to give a couple goobers a whole bunch of like money and some cameras to run around the world looking for these treasures.
I was going to say, that would be a great non-essential podcast special, is us trying to go treasure hunting. And
oh, fuck yeah. That's one of my dream jobs. If anybody wants to, like, fund us, even it doesn't have to be, like, even a serious, like, $1 million expedition. Like, just pay for our airfare to some other country, and we'll just walk around asking people.
It would be an hour-long special, and then just at the very end, I'd just be sitting there, having not really moved or done anything to help, just being like, yeah, it's probably not real. Yeah.
Well, the funny part is we'd be walking around one of these like South American
you would be
countries.
Like dehydrated and fucking like dying. I'd be like, yeah, whatever. Get on the boat.
But our whole plan to find the treasure would be to just ask locals, like, hey, do you know where this treasure is? And then of course they wouldn't speak English.
I heard I heard you guys had $200 million, and I wanted to get in on that. Have you heard anything?
And the best part is we'd come across somebody that would tell us exactly where the treasure is, but it would be in Spanish, so we'd be like, oh, they must not know either.
Yeah. There's probably a few, like, your motives for coming there probably don't matter much to them. They'd be like, well, a tourist is a tourist. Yeah. They're going to have to fucking eat here, so that's good for us.
And like I said, I'll probably explore this genre further if we continue to do the show, and I'm running out of topics, but I do know, treasure hunting is a thing. There are people that search for treasure, and there are people that find, like I said, it's mostly more like the sunken ship stuff. But with treasure hunting, it literally is like the Indiana Jones stuff, where you do get people that will kill you to steal the treasure that you found, and there's a lot of backstabbing and that kind of stuff. Like the people that really do it do have to watch their backs and go through. There's some crazy stories.
It's like that Pawn Wars show where people like fucking, turncoat on each other for like goddamn storage lockers and shit. But imagine that same mentality applied to something that's actually cool and interesting. And
worth a lot of money, and typically found out in the middle of nowhere where there's very few authorities. Like, So,
well, I decree everything you just said is true, and the money's still out there. Go get it, folks.
I like to think Muggsy Bogues found it. Like,
he didn't find shit. He was a hothead.
He's a baseball player. Yeah. He wasn't part of the story. I think he's a baseball player. I meant
Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy Siegel.
Yeah.
No, Muggsy I don't know who Muggsy is.
Bogues probably found it. You're actually right. It was probably him.
I think that's a baseball player now that I think about it. I don't know who Muggsy is. It's a name that's just in my head. Player. Basketball?
Yeah. Does
he still play, or he's retired?
He's super old. He was in Space Jam. He was the really small one.
God damn it, Ben! That makes me feel terrible. When he's super old, he was in Space Jam.
He's super old, and you're old
I was in high school
too.
when that came out.
I was.
But that's why he retired. I'm going to say that's why he retired from the NBA. He found the treasure. It's like,
He retired because in the off season he just found $200 million.
he wasn't even looking for
ship.
it. He's taking a vacation. He's like, I need to get away. This island is uninhabited. It sounds good to me. He put his like folding chair out and set it down in the sand, and it went clink on something. And
That's good. I always liked Muggsy Bogues. I'm glad he's doing well.
He's just sitting on a throne between two golden Virgin Marys.
He's sitting on a throne decorated with the aliens from Space Jam. And the same idea of like the Virgin Mary blinged out statue, but it's just fucking Looney Tune shit.
Yeah, he melted those down and had them recast.
The true star of Space Jam, by the way, Muggsy Bogues. Now I'm doubting myself. I need to find out if that's actually the dude from Space Jam. Because now that you've said it, I was like, that does totally sound like a baseball player.
Yeah, first thing I type Muggsy Bogues, dunk comes up, so I assume he's not a baseball player.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, it's the basketball player. 5'3".
Really?
Yeah. He was a fucking tricky pain in the ass in NBA Jam though. Because like if you were not big enough to dunk, you will hit every 3-point shot in that game. All right. So anyway, now that we solved a real mystery here of who is Muggsy Bogues, we'll be back next week with another story. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.